It's not calling you Josh Frydenberg, it's calling you Dosh Frydenberg.
Under the coalition, taxes for hard-working Australians will always be lower.
You know, I don't hold a hose, mate, and I don't sit in control room.
They're answers that only can come from Victoria, I'm afraid, because that's not my job.
But I ain't spending any time, though, because in the meantime, every 3 months, a person was torn to pieces by a crocodile in North Queensland.
Well, g'day, listeners, and welcome once again to the Two Jacks. I'm here with Hong Kong Jack, as usual, on episode 91. How are you, mate?
Not bad.
And how are things in Hong Kong today?
Lovely weather here at the moment. I always think autumn's the best season, and we're having a really good one. Some years it morphs from air conditioner on full pelt to the heating on full pelt in about 10 days, but we're getting a nice autumn interlude this year.
A bit like the Southern Highlands in springtime, Jack. You wanted to make mention you have a number of Nepalese friends, certainly around your local, and it is Dashain, which is the biggest festival for all Nepalese people.
Yeah, and in some parts of India and Sri Lanka as well, they do the same thing. It's essentially a Hindu thing. It sort of celebrates the triumph of good and evil, and if you look up the respected authors, they say that a hell of a lot of different things are celebrated, like playing traditional games and flying kites. But my pals, they're big on the having a feast and plenty to drink.
So that's what it's about, a bit of fun.
Yeah.
Good has conquered evil. Is it Dashami, Vijaya Dashami, sort of cast some ne'er-do-well to oblivion, and it's a good excuse to get on the terps.
And the young people get a little kind of a mixture of rice and yogurt put on the middle of their forehead. You know?
I think I saw a Nepalese woman in my part of the world. There's actually quite a large Nepalese population in the Southern Highlands, Jack. And yes, I did notice a bit of something a bit extra. It wasn't just a little dot, white shape on the forehead.
Yeah, it's a mixture of rice and yogurt. There are a lot of Nepalese in Hong Kong, of course, because that goes back to the Gurkha days. There was always a Gurkha regiment here in the British days.
One of the most honoured regiments in the British Empire, Jack.
Yes, yeah, and I wouldn't be surprised if there's a fair few in Melbourne as well. I was talking to an Indian Australian who was back for a few days last week, and she was commenting on just how many Indians there now are in Melbourne since she's moved back after 20 years up here, and she was quite staggered at just how many Indians there are now in Melbourne.
The great Indian diaspora around the world. Yes, look, I just wanted to say now that will be a happy time around the world for all Nepalese people, for the Nepalese diaspora. But we need to move on to matters Australian. And, Jack, we'll start with the news poll here, which shows the coalition in front for the first time in the news poll. What do you make of it? And do you think it's a cause for alarm bells to be ringing for the Labor government? I would think so. I think those alarm bells have been ringing for a year now.
Yeah, it's 12 months. There's 12 months yesterday since the Voice thing was lost.
Yes, been a lot of media coverage here,
and they lost a little bit of skin off because the Voice referendum was lost, and not so much. I think people are quite capable of distinguishing between the two issues that voters are between voting for a referendum and voting for who's the government, but. The government made a bit of a mess of the Voice thing. It's not the result. It's their tactics weren't very good, their procedures weren't very good, and you lose a little bit of credibility with that. And they've never quite gotten it back. They've fumbled a lot since then.
Yeah, and I think that's fair. Look, it's not unusual, even for a first-term government, to be falling behind the polls by a couple of points. It's 51-49, two-party preferred.
And I might add that was because the Greens lost 1% or 2%, which changed the preference.
I was just going to say that. So, the Greens went down a point to 12, and I suspect they need to have a bit of a look at themselves too about particularly their parliamentary tactics. And their policy tactics, particularly around housing, I think it's way too confrontational. And they should be good little parliamentarians and sit down and try and negotiate good things for the Australian people rather than walking away in a huff and holding press conferences outside the parliament.
The Australian Democrats managed to have quite a reasonable career for a small party because they actually got the deals done.
Yeah, well, Pauline Hanson's One Nation party is up to 7%, and that often in polling will include a sort of none of the above on the right wing, on the right, I should say, of politics. And so it would be not so much an endorsement of Pauline Hanson's One Nation, but Libertarian Party and other sort of right-wing groups around the country. They do have another section, including Teal Independence, that is also unchanged at 12%. Look, alarm bells for the Albanese government should be ringing soundly, and should have been ringing soundly for a long time. I just see today that Albo has bought himself a substantial house on the Central Coast for $4.3 million. Obviously, these things become public because he's a public figure. And I suspect if we did a bit of a comparison, Peter Dutton's real estate investments would be a little bit more significant than Albo's. But that doesn't look all that great either, does it? Lashing out a $4.3 million home when you're Prime Minister?
Well, it's the timing
around
thing.
A housing crisis?
It's the timing thing more than anything else. I mean, Peter Dutton, I believe, has been accumulating a property portfolio for 30 years.
Substantial, and I think he's got the house and the farm. And the house is on the Goldie, I think, fairly big.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with any of that for either of them. No, it's just the timing thing that it doesn't. It looks like another example of kind of not getting it.
We live in rarefied air, and we don't really understand what you people are going through at the moment.
Yeah. And for the government, sadly, it looks at it's not a terribly important example of that. There are much more important ones. They're still not addressing the big problem with the economy, and that's getting productivity off. There's no attempt to There's no attempt to do that. So.
And inflation remains a bit of a problem. Bit better figures in the United States on their cost of living issues, but we need to move on to telecommunications, Jack, and the NBN. Well, Prime Minister Albanese has said that he will introduce legislation to prevent the NBN from ever being privatised. Good luck with that, firstly. And it can just be, that legislation can be overwritten by a successive government who wants to sell it. So it's all a bit silly. But Albo said there's never been a public service or asset that the Liberal Party didn't want to carve up. They spent a decade trying to destroy the NBN, replacing fibre with copper. First, I think we want to ask how the NBN's going. And look, you're quite right. You made some comments here that I was never very, very happy with our internet service around the country, not just mine. The NBN has resolved this to a large degree, and it is part of the Albanese government's policy to roll out. And what's the sort of the verbiage? It's an add-on, I suppose. That now that we've got fibre to the node, I mean, many homes around Australia, around about 15%, have fibre to the premises, particularly in regional Australia, about 15%. So now they're rolling it out to bring in fibre to the home. We've had some NBN guys around here examining things, but most people, particularly in regional Australia, where there's not a lot of choice, are going with fibre to the node. Mine works fine, and I've got very high speeds, but my mobile internet speed is faster than that. It's because I'm on top of a mountain staring straight across another one where there's a great big transponder. But some people don't have that luxury, Jack. And some, my brother-in-law, for example, he signed up to SpaceX's Starlink because he found his internet fibre to the node connection was about a kilometre. The node was about a kilometre away from his home. Extremely slow, unworkably slow. So he jumped on the Starlink. It's certainly price-wise, it's certainly on a par with the NBN, and it's fairly reliable. It will drop out around heavy weather sort of issues, around storms and things like that. There'll be some issues around Starlink there, but of course in the cities we have a blend of mobile and fixed services as well. I think overall, the problems we had 10 years ago, and these were issues that directly responsible to Coalition in the Howard days. They spent a lot of time just fighting Telstra, and then they sold it off, and then they realised in selling it off, they'd created a monopoly around a telecommunications framework in the country.
Yeah, that monopoly problem goes back. It ran through the Howard government, but goes back to the Hawke government. There was a battle in the Hawke government, I think, between Keating and Beazley as to whether, when they were forming Telstra, as to whether Telstra should take in the old overseas telecommunications service. My recollection is that Keating wanted to keep that separate and build two telecommunications companies, build one around the OTC and build one around telecom, so that they could compete. And when they were sold off,
as usual, the great man was a visionary. The sort of problems that we were going to have.
Yeah. One of Albo's got two problems with this idea is, one, it's very hard to bind future governments, as you pointed out. All you can do is push some legislation through and ensure that they're going to have to get the support of the Senate as well to bring it back in. And I suppose that's a handicap on doing it. So there's you can restrict what they do, but you can't stop them from doing it. And the other thing, of course, is that, people have memories and they know that it was, the Labor government, the Hawke and Keating governments were great privatisers, and indeed the state Labor governments were as well.
Blokes like you and I have memories, Jack, but if you're a bit younger, all you're looking at is your internet speed and if it's fast enough. That's the thing. So if someone says, we will give you, or we will offer you a service that will be better, you're going to go at that. You might also have a sort of philosophical opposition to privatisation. But if we sold off the NBN, it wouldn't create a monopoly, but it would go very close to it. That would be the other issue. That we're looking at around about 80% of Australians who are using the NBN.
Yeah, my concern with it was that there was a hell of a lot of money being tipped into it on the presumption that nearly everybody would want a landline internet service. And I kind of looked around the world and thought, that's not going to work in most of the world, the landline internet service. So someone somewhere is going to come up with the technology to do it without that.
Oh, well, that's sort of happening. That's really happening now in the big cities, in big cities of this country. Well, I think the landlines are almost a thing of the past. My own landline, I have to have one because I was when I signed up for with Telstra for access to the NBN services. That was one of the deals, and when I moved house, I said, "Now look, I'll get rid of the landline." Because really only get the odd hoax call and a call from my father-in-law. You can pretty much put that there. That's the only time it rings. Well, and I never use it to ring out. So
not only did we haven't had one. I can't remember when we last had a landline, but I don't know anybody else who's got a private landline.
Yeah, I know. I'm fairly unusual,
and I wouldn't know their number. And there's no such thing as a phone book, so you couldn't look it up.
No, that's right. Well, Telstra told me, I'm sorry, you must keep your landline. But there is no real need for it. You can have fixed services to the home, sometimes from the node, sometimes directly to the premises, and not have a landline as thrown into the bargain.
I wonder how much the Starlink type approach where there is no fixed service to the property is going to, how much of the market that will take up. Because
I think for people who are mobile, it's very, very good. I see a lot of people, the grey nomads, for example, they'll all use Starlink services as they go, so people who are moving around. And also those people, and these things still exist, in Bowral, I know for a fact, you know, you can be living a kilometre from the node, and because Bowral's a fairly old town, if you're in Old Bowral, you're using, you know, it's a kilometre of copper wire that may have degraded, may have been subject to flooding, may have, you know, all this sort of stuff over the course of, let's say, 100 years. So a lot of people in certainly one part of the Southern Highlands find that they have really no internet use, and that should be fixed straight away. They just need to fix up and reinstall or put in a new node or a series of new nodes. But that might be delayed because what they are doing in regional Australia first is to roll out fibre to the premises. So that's what NBN is doing at the moment. That's Albanese policy. I think they're spending, off the top of my head, about $3 billion in doing that. And fibre to the premises, look, if you've got it, good luck to you. You have extraordinary speeds that are limited only to physics around the speed of light and to the manner of in which the tubes, the pipes hooking up all the internet are going to delay that speed. But Skylink, yes, I know it's penetrated the market. I think it's got about 3% of the market, Jack.
Yeah, I think that's right. I look at it and see almost all. I'm told that almost all of the banking and internet service providing in sub-Saharan Africa is done through mobile phones.
Yeah, I think they're going to find more and more of that. That's the case.
And that's happening around Asia as well, because you know they haven't got any kind of fixed internet connection, and they never will.
But you have to have competitive environment if you're going to have that, Jack. Otherwise, you will have sort of price gouging and all that sort of stuff. If you've only got one provider, you will have sort of price gouging on the cost of a mobile internet. The mobile internet in this country is still far more expensive than it is for, you know, the megabytes, the kilobytes, the terabytes that you get coming through your hole in the wall. Meanwhile, Jack, part of the world that you would deeply love, Corowa, was infected by Nazis on the weekend. The ABC reports a small community on the Victoria-New South Wales border is in shock after a group of about 50 people shouting white supremacist slogans and carrying banners held a rally in their town. Why would they go to Corowa, Jack?
Oh, I'm not sure about Corowa. I mean, it was almost the capital of Australia. It was in the last three, I think, to be the capital of Australia.
Yes, indeed, it was part of the discussions anyway. But it was also the place where Federationists met in 1893. Not all of them turned up, but Corowa considers itself, and to a degree, it's a valid claim, that they are the sort of that Corowa is the birthplace of Australian Federation, and I suspect that's why the Nazis were up there. But the bit I loved about this, Jack, was the people of Corowa just weren't having it, right? And there's a lovely little interview from the ABC with a Ms. Smith. She said they weren't interacting with locals until they had finished. And when they were walking through the RSL car park, some locals had gathered there and were telling them off, saying, "We don't want racist people here," and to go home. Ms. Smith said outraged community members were following the group in their cars, hurling abuse out their windows. There were lots of kids playing there and lots of angry parents, she said. It was a little hostile. Ms. Smith did not believe the group members were local and said she had never seen an incident like this in town before. She's referring to the Nazis, of course. It was horrible because we do have a lot of people of colour here. It is just disgusting. We did hear one of them say to a young local boy, I'm not sure of his ethnicity, "Piss off, you stink." He would only be about 14 years old. But God bless the people of Corowa, Jack. They have essentially evicted Nazis from their town, chasing them around in cars, which I deeply love. So God bless the wonderful people of Corowa, the birthplace of this very fine nation, Jack.
I got into a small a spat on Twitter about this. Someone posted up the photo, some supporter of the people in the visitors to Corowa, and they were almost certainly visitors
all masked except for Thomas Sewell, who's a well-known and neo-Nazi in Australia.
And I made my usual comment about, masks off, please. I don't mind if people do this sort of thing, but we should know who they are, is my view about that. And some chap came back on and said, well, good luck trying to get that off them. And I just kind of laughed. And I just kind of laughed and said, well, hard bastards don't go around cosplaying, whether they're for Antifa or the Proud Boys. It's just not something that the really hard people do.
The one thing you do, I mean, you might remember the old Australian Nazi Party and clown that was running that.
Like Skull?
Yeah, well, his skull was the mate, the guy who had some sort of congenital birth defect, chosen race, give me a break, or the perfect race, give me a break. Very different to nowadays. They do not display, and it's not because of legislation that we talked about last week that bans and prohibits the display of Nazi symbols. Nazis in Australia, they do not want to confront people with those kinds of symbols. They prefer to act, shall we say, surreptitiously to get their people in. So I overheard a conversation between a neo-Nazi and one of his fellows saying, "Look, we'll get them in, and we'll wait a while before we approach them about the JQ, which is the Jewish question." So they ease them in on the basis of, the white man as being overrun, as being exploited. It's not our country anymore. All this sort of nonsense. Drag them in and then start filling their heads with this sort of Nazi nonsense.
I might add, I know the Corowa and that Murray region quite well. I grew up there, and
friends there.
Yeah, and it's not a really mixed community, but there have always been, and for a long time, there have always been part of the community is Greek or Italian or whatever else, and these days Pacific Islander or Indian. And everyone tends to rub along okay.
Yeah, everyone tends to embrace the introduction of new cultures and new ethnicities around the simple assessment that we're all human beings.
Yeah, so if these fools thought they could go up to a place like Corowa and, be offered a cup of tea and a sandwich, then they don't know much about it at all.
Got run out of town by the locals. I love it. God bless you, Corowans, including a couple of good friends of mine who live in that part of the world. Peter Beattie came forward with a fairly strong criticism of the Labor Party, Jack, the Albanese government in particular, and particularly around foreign policy.
He did. Again on Twitter, someone was complaining that in the Hawke-Keating years, they never got this sort of criticism from past Labor leaders. And Troy Bramston was very quick to point out, and I joined him in this, that they must have short memories because there was a lot of people from the Whitlam government who never stopped banging on about how terrible the Hawke and Keating governments were.
Indeed, yeah. That it was far too far to the right and what have you. Yeah. So what did Beattie have to say? He's obviously pretty well versed in foreign affairs. Takes an active interest. Former Queensland Premier, of course. Doesn't really necessarily have come with it an expertise in foreign relations, but he seems to have a pretty good grasp of it, Jack.
He's good practical.
If I can just quote him just before you go on. Yeah. Too many leaders are frightened by social media, where anything goes and truth is irrelevant to debate. Leadership is about overcoming a world where journalistic ethics have been significantly subjugated. Oh, good on you, Pete. She's not a media tart anymore. And this is the result of the constant fight between under-resourced newsrooms and the latest posting on X. This has seriously confused public debate and undermined political will.
Yeah, his key point, I think, was to say that the two-state solution in the Middle East is a daydream, unless all the parties accept Israel's right to exist, and that's partly been achieved by the Abraham Accords and the things and the other agreements around them, that Israel's really made peace with most of its neighbours.
He said, on foreign policy, a two-state solution in the Middle East is a daydream unless all parties accept Israel's right to exist as a first step. A peace plan will fail unless it is led by Arab nations and Israel, and with all parties accepting Israel's right to exist. A ceasefire is the noble objective we all want, but alone it will not bring peace. He does refer to cries of people calling for a ceasefire without any particular objective behind it.
Yeah.
He does say, and this is the point that caught my eye, and I can't do anything but agree with him. Unfortunately, US, Russian, and Iranian foreign policy interventions make peace in the Middle East almost impossible. That's a big statement, but that's about right. That there is a game of chess going on there at any given time. That means conflict is always almost inevitable.
Yes.
All righty. Well, and here's the point another point that caught my eye, Jack, if we can just spend a little bit of time on this, from Peter Beattie, the old media tart himself. One of my favourite stories about Peter Beattie, by the way, Jack, if we want to undermine him just that little bit, is that when he was when he was still Premier of Queensland, there was a nurses' strike. There had been a lack of staffing around Queensland hospitals, in one in particular north of Brisbane, that just had to basically close its emergency department because of the lack of staff, lack of trained, qualified staff, and there were an angry group of nurses and community people all getting together and protesting what was essentially a Beattie government initiative to keep these numbers fairly low. And Peter Beattie went out and joined them in the protest.
He did.
Completely shameless.
He couldn't walk past a microphone or a camera without putting an appearance. Do you remember Tom Roper?
Yes, I do.
I think he was the member for Brunswick. He was the member for Brunswick. Lived at just the top end of Princess Park there. And Tom was just as good as Peter Beattie. There was an occasion where there was a kerfuffle down at Royal Melbourne, just a kilometre down the other end of Royal Parade. And it was early in the morning. Tom's wife was away, so he grabbed the kids still in their pyjamas and dressing gowns and took them with him so he could put his face in front of the microphone and give a response.
Shameless. But he does make, this is Peter Beattie, not Roper, but he says, finally, Australia needs to lift the quality of future politicians at state and federal level. I don't think too many people would disagree with that. One way to do this is a comprehensive social studies course in schools. It would be in the national interest. This is the civics sort of lesson stuff, Jack.
Yeah.
How government works, how political parties work, how legislation becomes enacted, how elections are run and won and lost. I actually do think that our education curricula around the country should be making. I don't know that we'll deliver great results in terms of furnishing the country with better politicians, but I would think it's in the interests of all people to understand how our governments work. So many people I speak to have no idea how government works. I think it's a useful thing to be able to understand that, and it's something that people should know.
Yeah, I think so as well. He was also talking about 4-year terms and cutting the number of senators and all that sort of stuff. And there's some merit in all those ideas, but they're awfully hard to get through. Good luck getting it done.
Good luck doing it. Easy on the op-ed pages and not so hard in reality. But I would think a sort of civics-based course or sub-course within a history or social studies or that sort of curricula, where at least 6 months is devoted to how government works, how governments are elected, and what have you, and a bit of Australian political history to boot, would be a very good thing for this country, particularly for young people who often have to go to university to find these things out. But speaking of Beattie, Jack, Queensland election is now just 11 days away as we record this on the 15th of October. The Queensland election will be on the 26th. And look, I know you've got a piece here. I'm seeing some polling that shows Stephen Miles and Labor making a little bit of a comeback, Jack.
Yeah, I saw a little bit of that, yeah.
And largely around LNP's missteps around reproductive rights for women, where Chris Afuli, the opposition leader, said no, there will be no changes to legislation which essentially decriminalised abortion in Queensland, only done a few years ago, shamefully, and then a couple of his backbenchers, perhaps backbenchers forever now, came forward and said, "Well, no, they were willing to knock it over," and that's caused some problems.
Yes. Apart from that, it's been an auction as an election.
Yeah, it has. Yeah.
With both parties bidding to build more and more things, most of which will never get built because they haven't got the money.
Well, Queensland's budget's in pretty good shape, and that's largely due to mining royalties.
Yes,
but their budgetary position is much better than Victoria's and New South Wales.
Well, almost everyone's better than Victoria.
Well, yes, this is true. But I'm going to say they're in surplus, but I may be wrong. But they've got, what I'm saying is they've got the money to throw around a bit anyway. The 50 cent rail or public transport tickets, those sorts of things.
7 new hospitals, all that sort of stuff. Yeah.
I suspect it's not for that reason that Miles has made something of a recovery. But if Labor were to win in Queensland, it would be a
miracle,
huge turnaround from what we're seeing.
Yeah, the reason I say it's an auction is that everything Miles has offered to spend money on, the Liberals have just said, we'll do that as well. So.
Me too. Yeah, no, that's exactly what's going on. We're finding that the Labor Party is basically trying to dig in, sandbag the regions. Queensland is the most decentralised state in the Commonwealth.
I think it's the only state where the capital city doesn't form a majority of the population of the state.
Yeah, so a regionalised population, and it seems that Miles is spending a lot of his time in southeast Queensland, what we might call the Goldie, and the hinterland there, Jack.
Yep.
Because that's where it seems to be won and lost.
Yeah.
We shall keep an eye on it all.
At least he'll be able to say he got to be Premier.
Well, we'll see. 11 more sleeps and we'll see. Moving overseas now, and I presume many of us saw this on our news broadcast last night. SpaceX basically landed their giant booster rocket, or re-landed it after firing a craft off into space. It wobbled around and was grabbed by the great big arms of the launching pad, and it's ready to go again amid hysteria from space watchers, Jack.
Well, I found it. Yeah, I thought this is going to be something to have a look at, but it was surprisingly impressive to watch. This thing's 17 stories high.
I know, but it looked like a piece of Meccano, didn't it?
Yeah.
It looked like something that was sort of knocked out in the basement.
And they've managed to bring it down from just on suborbital height.
It hasn't got that far in. Yeah, it was certainly in subspace.
And not quite landed on a sixpence, but not too far from it. Landed close enough.
Couple of balls.
Yeah, but landed close enough that that these giant mechanised arms were able to grasp it and put it back. And the idea is, Musk says eventually the idea is it'll be a half a day turnaround and they'll fill it up and send it up for the next one.
Yeah, that's the benefits once you have this successful technology, that you will be able to get into space much, much quicker by simply reusing the rockets that put you on the verge of space. And I guess this was the basis of the thinking behind the space shuttle too. I mean, to have something that was renewable every time, rather than going through the process of constructing a rocket that would simply be discarded after taking a craft into orbit.
What I was really impressed by, it just seemed such an improbable thing to do, to bring this booster down and land it like that, and yet they did it.
Yeah, 17 stories high. Quite an extraordinary piece of engineering. Hurricanes, Jack, what's going on there? Now, we actually covered the hurricanes considerably last week, just before you go on, Jack. And there are big problems in Florida, in Georgia, in the Carolinas, particularly western part of North Carolina, enormous amount of flooding there. And, of course, the Donald has been chirping up saying FEMA has been defunded, FEMA won't be able to help you, and this has caused enormous problems, Jack.
Yeah. I don't know how accurate that is. Ron DeSantis, who seems to have done a fairly good job as governor of Florida on these issues, doesn't seem to be jumping into it to agree with him.
Yeah, no, that's right. It is pretty ugly stuff, quite frankly. I mean, FEMA reported today that they had stopped doing their house-to-house door knocks in West North Carolina because of fear that they would be approached by militia groups. So that's really, really bad stuff. And, all politics aside, there should be a recognition that people are suffering very, very badly at the moment. We talked about the issues around being uninsured for flooding. People might be insured for hurricane damage, but they won't be insured for flooding. And more people on the west and east coast of Florida and up into the Carolinas are finding that their homes are uninsurable, full stop.
Yeah, well, on the barrier islands, most insurers won't cover you for hurricane damage on the barrier islands.
That's been the case for some time, but that group of uninsurables is now really expanding. And rather than make cheap politics out of it, perhaps politicians like Trump should be addressing those issues.
Yeah, and generally speaking, people probably should tone down the warnings. It was at the mayor of Sarasota where the thing was meant to land. I think it did land there. It was on the TV the night before telling people, if you don't evacuate, you will die. And of course, some people might die, but that's just not sound advice. I mean, there are all sorts of reasons why some people won't evacuate, and most of them won't die.
I believe the evacuation levels, particularly around Western Florida, Tampa Bay, etc., were officials both Florida and federal were very pleased with it. That there are a lot, the instruction to leave was followed by a great many people.
Yeah,
so that diminishes you. Yeah, but I know what you're saying. Don't go over the top with it. But and I think in times like this, you might even excuse a politician. I don't even know this guy, but you might excuse him going.
Yeah, no, I've got a friend who lives in Tampa, and he and his wife jumped into the RV and headed up to Georgia. And they could, and most of his friends were able to get out, but that wasn't practical for everybody. And I think it's wrong to be telling people, you are going to die if you stay there.
It's just a little bit of a reminder, Jack, that FEMA does not look after, legislatively cannot look after people who were homeless before the storm, before the hurricanes hit. And they are excluded from providing assistance to them. And in fact, under DeSantis' regime, being homeless is illegal anyway, Jack. Not a great way of looking at things. Over to the Middle East now, and the Quds Force. I'm never quite sure how to pronounce that, Jack, but I presume it's Quds Force. I think I've heard it a number of times pronounced that way. The commander of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard's elite Quds Force has been arrested, or reportedly, and is being interrogated, one would think, fairly harshly, over claims of intelligence breaches.
He didn't turn up. He was meant to be at the Shura Council meeting last week, and at the last minute he didn't turn up. And the Israelis managed to drop a bomb on that meeting, and he wasn't there. This is a bad time to be calling in and saying,'I've got a dental appointment,' or I couldn't change my hairdressing appointment, so I'm not going to make the meeting."
I just woke up and I just didn't feel like it. So that's Brigadier General Esmail Khani is being investigated over alleged ties to Israel. Sky News Arabic reported this morning that he had suffered a heart attack while under interrogation, Jack. You can tell he's not from Russia, he'd be through a window by now, but in Iran he has a heart episode. And so we're looking at this, this prestigious Iranian paramilitary group that basically got a huge question mark all over them now, Jack, in Iran for collusion with Israel.
Within Iran and Hezbollah, it's hard to see how anybody would be trusting anybody else because you really don't know who the Israelis are compromised.
Well, Khani apparently has wonderful timing. He turned up in Lebanon 2 days after Nasrallah was assassinated to, as he said, to assess the situation on the ground. So he has a unique, we need to speak about him in the past tense now. He had a unique ability to be in the right place at the wrong time. No, the wrong place at the right time. Meanwhile, Jack, in regard to the Middle East, David Shoebridge has made what I can only consider as a fairly significant and well-considered response to the situation in the Middle East. Were you staggered when you read this?
No, but it's a rare display of common sense.
That's what I thought too. I think he is one of the better Greens, to be honest, too. One of the better informed and more articulate Australian Greens. He said, or this is how he opened his piece in the op-ed section of the Australian, "There's an open secret among the governments of the Middle East that's driving their respective approaches to the war between Israel and Iran. They all welcome a weakened Iran and the dismantling of its terrorist proxies almost as much as Israel does." Good bit of common sense there, Jack.
Yeah, he made a very good point that no regional government really wants to carry the burden of the Palestinians more than they already do or more than they have to. And there are very few politicians or pundits in the West who seem to understand that.
Referring to Hezbollah and Hamas, he said, "None of this is new. Israel is fighting a regional war against Iran and its proxies, and the results of this could be a less dangerous Middle East with more open space for regional nations to craft diplomatic solutions and assist weakened states once Iran's toxic reach is reduced."
Yeah,
good stuff, and well done to David,
and to the Oz for printing it.
Well, yes, that will be in the hands of the very wonderful Nicholas Jensen, and he is a very fine commentary editor. I noticed, I think I mentioned this last week, so I don't want to labour the point, but I've been noticing things on X, including an activist woman who was saying, there was a hashtag, "I stand with Iran." And you think, how deluded are you? Would you like to spend a couple of days there just to make sure that you stand with Iran?
Yeah,
we'll give you a month. We'll put you in there for a month, see how you get on.
Yeah, I quite like people outing themselves as supporters of Hezbollah or Hamas or Iran. I like to know who these people are.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's part of your fixation around masking and what have you. But I had to pinch myself because I thought it was a piss take at first. You go, how can you be that deluded? But there you certainly can. Now, Jack, you've got...
There are more than a few people who are closet supporters of Iran and Hezbollah, etc., who are just fudging and obfuscating when you ask them, but they really are supporting.
Well, yeah, look, yes, I'm sure there are probably, you can find a smattering of supporters for the People's Republic of North Korea, Democratic People's Republic of North Korea too. But this conflict in the Middle East has forced some people into some very strange positions. I think that's the point that I would want to make there. Meanwhile, Jack, big news, big NBC national poll. You just run through the figures and then I'll have a crack at the polling because I would like our listeners to understand the limits of polling. So have a go at those numbers there, Jack.
This is the NBC News poll.
It was released yesterday or Sunday, Sunday US
Sunday,
time.
yeah. So Trump and Harris 48-48. That's a 4% increase for Trump over the last month post the debate. And the Trump's retrospective job approval is 48% as against Biden's 43%. There's a whole lot of further sub-polls, I guess. One of the things they tested was the impact on your family with Biden policies, helping 25%, hurting 45%. The Trump policies impact on your family retrospective. This is from his 4 years as president. Helped 44, hurt 31. And they also noted the gender pay gap, the gender gap. That it's 56-40 against Trump in men and 55-41 against for Harris for women. Sorry, rather. So
yeah.
Trump gets the support from men, Harris from women.
Yeah, look, it's probably a good idea. I mean, a lot of our listeners will be looking at polling, particularly in the US presidential election, and wondering, where it's all going to go. What we know is that it's really close. The polling says that it's really, really close. But there are a large number of polling companies now, much, much bigger than much more than there were in 2020. And some of this stuff is getting more and more dubious by the day. So I went through this NBC poll, not to basically say that it's a skewed poll designed for some political purpose, but just to show people why some polling is completely unreliable. So the first thing you probably should always be sceptical about is that Kamala Harris is, and this was the headline, she did a media blitz over the last 3 weeks and lost 5 points as a result. Now, the first thing you should say is 5 points without anything actually ever really significant happening, like Joe Biden dropping out of the race. Why would it be like that? So I looked at this. As Jack said, it's 1,000 registered voters. And then you go into the age breakdowns. So in the October poll, 43% of those polled were between 18 and 39, and 34% of those polled were 60 plus. Now, on voting, actual voting in 2020, the 60 pluses constituted just 27% of all votes cast, and the 18 to 39s, 29%. So in that poll, in that October poll, those two groups are clearly overrepresented. The group in the middle, the 40s to 59s, they constitute 44% of total votes cast in 2020, but only 32% of them were polled. The September poll from NBC, which cast Kamala Harris in a good light with I think a 5 or 6% boost, did similar things. The 18 to 39-year-old respondents were about right, a little bit over, and the 60 pluses were overrepresented by almost 10%. And again, that bulk of voters in 39 to 60, which make up 44% of all ballots cast in 2020, only 31% were polled. So I look at that NBC poll, and I'm looking at a lot of polling right now and wondering just exactly how accurate it is. And we know from 2016 that it was bad. We know from 2020 that it was even worse. 2022 midterms were pretty accurate, and you've obviously got a smaller number of voters involved there. So I just thought maybe it's a good time to have a chat to our listeners about what polling is best and what polling we should be asking questions about. This NBC poll, like a lot of the polls, I mean, I'd say Nate Silver ranks the NBC poll number 27. There's a Siena New York Times poll out, which he ranks at number 1, but both of them use mobile phones, right? So people used to talk about landlines, we were just talking about it ourselves, but they use mobile phones. And there are some issues that arise from mobile phones that are very similar to face-to-face polling. It's known in England as the shy Tory phenomenon, that when someone face-to-face or indeed on the telephone says to you who you're going to vote for, that those people might say, I want to give the person who's asking me questions the answer that I think he or she wants to hear. And so that
or that is acceptable to the people who are asking the question.
Yeah, but it's the same motivation. And telephone polling is very similar. Now, the shy Tory phenomenon was the reason why Trump's vote was underestimated by, I think, about 7 or 8% in 2016 and underestimated again in 2020, even though Biden won the election quite comfortably by
a smaller amount.
Yeah, over the college,
but the figures I've seen was about 9% in 2016 and down to about 5% in 2020.
Yeah. So what we see with a lot of face-to-face and mobile telephone polling, one of the things that the polling companies are introducing or have introduced is sort of robocall. So it's actually not a human being who's actually asking the questions, in an effort to sort of break down what we call the shy Tory phenomenon, and maybe that's successful, maybe it's not. Consider just for a moment that the phone rings at home, the wife picks up her mobile phone, the phone's been ringing, it's dinner time, she's being asked to give her opinions on who's going to win or who she's going to vote for in the presidential election, et cetera, and she may have some fairly strong views around women's reproductive rights, but she may not be all that comfortable about uttering those things in front of her husband, who might be a massive Trumper. It's just an example of why these things don't necessarily work. So when we talk about margins of error, this is the other thing. You know, the NBC poll, and like a lot of this sort of polling says, oh well, we've polled 1,000 registered voters, therefore there's a margin of error of 3% or 3.1% in this case. I would say on the stats it's closer to 6, and so that means Trump's support might be anywhere between 44 and 56, and Harris exactly the same. And we already knew that, right? So we already knew that's the kind of range we're talking about anyway. So this is what I'd say. A lot of this polling is junk. What's the best form of polling? Well, the market researchers will tell you. You know, if we're going to launch a new chocolate bar, what you want is 2,000 people, a group of mixed backgrounds, etc., and that set group of people are the same people that you ask different questions to as you go. So the 2,000 would be asked about who they were supporting, who they were going to vote for in the presidential election, and then asked again a month later, and then asked again a month later. And what you'll see there is you'll certainly get trends, and it will be more reliable. It will be more reliable. So those are the sorts of polls that you need to look at. Listeners, I know we've got the aggregators like RCP. RCP, as far as I can tell, are not weighting their polling. 538 is to a degree, but there is an enormous amount of junk out there. One of the polling companies that I do like the look of, Atlas Intel, because of their methodology, they've got Trump in front. And they use the same sort of methodologies that I just described, a fixed group of online respondents. So, yeah, just be mindful whenever you hear polling results, just that it might not be quite, there's going to be an obsession about these things over the next few weeks. We're only about 3 weeks away, actually. In fact, we're 3 weeks away today, Jack, from the election. And there's going to be a lot of obsession. Doesn't look like there's going to be an October surprise, some sort of political uproar or scandal. So there's going to be a heavy sort of emphasis on polling. And it's just be cautious about what you're seeing.
I did see a tip for what the October surprise might be. There's been a call over the last few days for Trump to release his medical reports, including his cholesterol level. And Kyle Smith suggested on Twitter that the October surprise would be if Trump's cholesterol level was within normal range.
Yeah, I can't see that, but it's not. That would be a surprise. But I don't think it's going to be.
There are two things I say about the polling is it's the trend that matters rather than the actual number, and the methodology you described is what all political parties around the world pretty much call focus groups, and they all use them. So if you want to know how the election's looking, look at the tactics and the strategies of the political parties, because they will tell you, those strategies and those tactics will tell you how they see the battle going on. And their focus groups are probably more accurate than any of the published polls.
Yeah, it's having a larger group of polling respondents, not quite the same as a focus group, but yeah, look, I take your point. As it stands, with weighted stuff from Silver Bulletin, that's Nate Silver's Silver Bulletin, we've got Harris in front by under a point in Pennsylvania, by 1.1% in Michigan, by 1% in Wisconsin. Trump leads by under 1% in North Carolina, under 1%. Ditto in Georgia. Arizona, he leads by 1.6% on aggregate weighted polling. And Nevada, Harris just in front. Florida, Trump up by 5.5%. Texas, Trump by 6.3%. Minnesota, Democrats, Harris by 6%. And New Mexico by 7.9%. So those critical states, these are all of the battlegrounds. I feel like we're missing one there, Jack, too. But anyway, the critical battleground states are Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Georgia. And basically, Kamala can afford to lose Georgia, but she can't afford to lose Pennsylvania, and she certainly can't afford to lose Michigan.
Yeah, I was asked on Sunday what I thought would happen if the election were this Tuesday, today. And I said, well, based on what the Democrats are doing, that they're changing their tactics, I suspect they think they're a little bit behind. So I think if it was held this Tuesday, probably Trump. But this is 3 weeks away.
Well, let me just introduce you to an Australian headline there under Greg Sheridan's name, Jack. As Trump closes on victory, Harris Dems will take desperate measures. I haven't read it, but I would think without a vote being cast, it's probably a little premature to be saying Trump is closing on victory.
Yes, I would have thought so. And I don't think they're taking desperate measures, but they are changing their strategy. And that generally indicates to me that they've got some concerns with what their numbers are.
Yeah. Oh, look, like I say, if Pennsylvania goes, I think that's it. I think that's it. As Nate Silver's aggregate weighted polling stands, Kamala Harris wins. With the loss of Georgia and Arizona, she would still have sufficient electoral college votes to get her across the line. So, but very, very tight. And we already knew that too. But I just thought at this particular time, given our listeners are being absolutely flooded with polling on the US presidency, maybe it was a good idea to have a look at polling. And the same works for Australia as well, where there is this kind of propensity around mobile phones. It used to be almost landline based. And we're talking about just 10 years ago when everyone had a mobile phone and hardly anyone had a landline. I guess fewer now. And then they'd wonder why they were 3 or 4 points out.
Well, if you want to look at the polling in Australia, pick one poll, whether it's essential or news poll, and follow the trend. Don't worry about the actual numbers. Follow the trend.
Yeah, that's about right. But if you got their numbers wrong, then the trend, the trend's basically questionable. Just by the way, Essential Research uses online fixed group polling, and I tend to find that when you're looking at the start of a trend, they'll be first to pick it up. So there you go. All right, Jack, this is another one of your segments. The best current opportunity for PE investors. Physical education. What are we talking about here, Jack?
Private equity investors. This is a new thing in the United States. They're jumping into the tradie service industries. They're buying up plumbing businesses and electrical business, HVAC as they call them in the United States, heating and plumbing, air conditioning.
Right. Okay.
Because they're profitable and because they can't be replaced by AI. And
not yet. Not yet.
Well, it's going to be a long time before a robot can come and unblock your toilet. Put it that way.
It won't be that long, mate. It seriously will not be that long. But I take your point. Carry on.
Yeah, I read this and I thought, don't send your kids off to do theatre studies at university. Tell them to sling on a tool belt and get to work.
Well, I would think one of the things, if you were going to impose yourself on your children and tell them, or at least give them some sort of direction on where they should be going, electrical engineering, electrical trades would be a very, very good thing to do, because more and more we are moving into an electrical world, Jack. And if you've got the ability to hook up a house, or indeed design how a house or indeed a business should be hooked up, the world will beat a path to your door for a very, very long time to come.
And even within those industries, don't be seduced too much by going to work in large construction and all that sort of stuff. That will come and go. It's a fickle industry. But if you're looking after the needs of everyday householders and consumers, they'll always be there.
We'll come in and hook up your charger for your electric vehicle, Jack. There's going to be a bit of demand for that too going forward. So, yes, we have struck on a bit of vocational stuff there. Plumbing, air conditioning, oh, yes, and with a warming planet, and of course, electrical trades as well.
Yeah, the private equity boffins, they can sniff a profit from about 400 miles. So if they're moving into it, there's money in it.
All right. Over to the UK now, and Keir Starmer. Well, Sir Keir is having a terrible time at the moment. It's like he just wasn't ready for this. I mean, it's not as if it was, a shock election victory.
It's not just him. That they all seem like they're
Gee whiz, what do we do now?
They're undergraduate student politicians. Well, have a foreign minister who seems to start every public utterance or appearance at a meeting by pointing out that he's a black man. And I reckon if I was sitting across from him in a meeting, I'd say, "You sure?" Well, I must have missed that when you walked in and sat down.
What? There's some issue around him attending not one, or two, but
three. There's Keir Starmer. Three
Taylor Swift concerts. He admitted in an interview that he doesn't have a favourite novel or poem, but he must love some of Taylor Swift's songs if he's turning up to see the show. And again, he's probably getting himself into all sorts of strife because did he pay for the ticket or was he given it?
They're all freebies. They're all freebies.
Well, I dare say that's right.
I can't remember who wrote this, but she pointed out that the big risk for this is not so much to Keir Starmer, it's to Taylor Swift.
Yeah.
Because the worst thing you can do is have a whole bunch of old fogey politicians turning up to watch him.
It's got a bit of a Marina Hydes about it, this column. I don't know if that's the case.
It could well have been Marina, but I've forgotten where I got it now. She remembered when she was 16, Noel Gallagher was pictured sipping champagne in 10 Downing Street with Tony Blair.
Yeah.
Had a stroke, Oasis image as rock and roll rebels was destroyed. Their next album was an enormous flop.
Well, Noel's got another spin on that, on their third album, because 1 and 2 went ballistic. But he said their third album, they were taking so much cocaine, they really just had no creative control. They had personally lost creative control about it. He goes, God, I've heard him interviewed to be on 5-minute guitar solos and all this sort of stuff. They had fallen into a world of wretched excess, and maybe having a sip of some champers at 10 Downing Street didn't help Noel all that much. Of course, they are reforming, Jack, and we'll see how that all goes. In fact, I will be attending the concert, I think, on November 7 at the Olympic Centre with my children, who are going to go and see how Noel and Liam are getting on after being stapled together for 12 months. But
so you'll be warbling along to Wonderwall, will you, with the kids?
Oh yeah, well look, they do have some great songs, and I just thought this is one I do want to see, and God only knows how much money they'll make. But I'd be surprised if Noel's not a billionaire by the time this is all done.
I think they needed the money. One of them's kind of been broke, I think, with a messy divorce.
Oh, no, they're all pretty good. I mean, Liam's got his own band, and it's actually a good time for a reformation, because Liam's got his own band and was going pretty well. Noel's had High Flying Birds for a long time, and I think they're all. I think both of them are pretty comfortable, but there will be a large dump truck full of money pulling up to both their addresses. So if it hasn't turned up already, this. Taylor Swift's tour last year, she made $1 billion from this, and it's likely that similar sort of money would go into the hands of the Gallaghers too.
Yeah, they have had a long and fractious relationship with each other. I've got quite a few English friends who are Oasis fans, and one of them in particular, he says, well, I'm going to go to one of the early concerts just in case that they don't last.
Well, yeah, absolutely. There will be there's a very strong likelihood that once they've been touring together for a year, it might not all work out, but a few tensions might arise. I did see Noel. I follow him on Instagram. Sorry, Liam. I did follow him on Instagram, and they said, how's Noel during the rehearsals? And Liam just said, he's God. So there's some new level of respect. Speaking of respect, Jack, Alex Salmond passed away. The founder or the great propeller of Scottish independence passed away this last week, Jack.
Yeah, opening a bottle of ketchup at lunch at a conference in somewhere in Eastern Europe. I've forgotten where. A sudden heart attack.
Yeah. Really? So, damn those sauce bottles. Those sauce bottle tops.
And from my perspective, he's a very young man. He's 69.
69, yeah.
But he was a really imposing political figure. I mean, the Scottish National Party were a rabble when he got the leadership, and he turned them into not just a credible force in Scottish politics, but he made them, in a sense, the natural party of government up there. I mean, yes. Scotland's basically a kind of a social democratic country, and there used to be a Labor Party stronghold, and he routed Labor and replaced them with SNP.
He was First Minister of Scotland for about 8 years, I believe, Jack.
Yeah. He couldn't quite get the referendum up.
Referendum up, which is something that Sturgeon was able to do, his successor, Nicola Sturgeon.
Yeah. And, of course, he had mentored her, but they had a horrendous falling out, which he says led to him being charged with sexual offences while he was the First Minister, et cetera, all of which he was acquitted on. So,
it was all very, very messy. And, of course, Nicola Sturgeon has her own scandalous problems to deal with now.
Yeah. But Salmond remained popular. I mean, and I had a look around on social media, and even for people who were opponents of his, there was an outpouring of quite seemingly genuine sorrow that everyone said that they disagreed with him about this or disagreed with him about the other thing. but that he was excellent company, and they enjoyed when he came to London and had a good lunch with them. So I think he was a fun man.
Jack, Poland will temporarily ban migrants from claiming asylum on its territory.
Yeah, this is Donald
Prime Minister Tusk said
this is Donald
on the weekend.
Tusk, the former, what was he, the president of the Council of Europe in the EU days. But this is becoming part of a pattern that the more easterly EU members refusing to buy into the EU's position on migrants and asylum seekers.
So Tusk, it must be said, is left of centre.
He is. This is no longer a left-right thing in the Eastern European countries. This is a kind of fairly general approach.
We might expect.
As indeed is in some of the other EU countries like Denmark and Sweden.
He said, I will demand this. I will demand recognition in Europe for this decision, he said, to basically overcome illegal challenges in regard to accepting refugees. He said, if someone wants to come to Poland, they must respect Polish standards, Polish customs. They must want to integrate. I do have a bit of a problem with this sort of imposing that, Jack. I think there are better ways, and I think Australia does them a lot better without being as strident as that.
Yeah, there are much better ways, and Australia has been kind of world's best practice in a sense for that, which is why if you look at the polls on support for immigration, Australia ranks right at the very top.
All right. And finally, before we get to sport, Jack, the ABC, much of ABC radio that runs both in Sydney, New South Wales and Australia has moved from the Gore Hill. Gore Hill, haven't been in Gore Hill for a while, but they moved from their Ultimo headquarters to Parramatta. And I gather there's been a bit of mockery going on, but I gather some of them are not terribly pleased. And they're constantly being reminded that it's a grueling 25-minute railway trip to Parramatta from Central. I think it's a little bit longer than that. I wouldn't be putting aside just the 25 minutes to get to Parramatta from Central by train. But yeah, look, I don't have a fixed idea about any of this. If I've done some ABC radio over the journey. If I was called into Parramatta or if I was called into Ultimo, I'd probably take Parramatta because it's a bit closer to home, but I don't really have a strong view about it. I can understand why people are a bit miffed. Apparently Richard Glover, who had the Drive segment that was going through a bit of ratings decline, Richard Glover was most unhappy. He wrote a column in the SMH, which you've also got to wonder about why are you talking about these things? But anyway, he bemoaning, he wanted his dreary old office back, and he wanted things to be the way they used to be, and he spat the dummy as a result. So,
mind you, he'd been doing the job for a long time and doing it pretty well.
He's a pretty good operator. He writes a lot of books that are very successful. I might see him occasionally around here because he's got a place out past Berrima, I think, in the middle of the scrub. He sort of takes people away there for weekends and things. So I see him every now and then, and not quite the way Bill Leake saw him one time, Jack, but we won't go into that right now.
I've got to say, to Glover's credit, he was gracious and generous when Bill died, when he could have still been having the myth.
We won't go into it, Jack. We won't go into it, but a very, very funny moment that many of us just chortle about whenever we think of. But
personally, I don't think the location matters that much, to be quite honest. The BBC did this in the UK.
Years ago, yeah.
They insisted upon shifting a whole lot of people to Manchester, a whole lot of their services and production facilities to Manchester, in the idea that this would broaden the whole BBC thing. It was a bit too London-centric, all that kind of stuff. It didn't really change a thing.
No, I doubt that it will change anything anyway. One of the things that still annoys a lot of ABC employees, having chatted to them, and I know names or anything like that, but I'm talking about film crew or, a cameraman, soundies, this sort of stuff, is that when the ABC decided to have a dedicated news program, ABC 24, or a dedicated news channel, ABC 24, it was done without a lot of consultation. It was done without a lot of understanding. There were some people there making decisions that were just awful. They had this idea that they could just basically run a news service 24/7, just following people around doing press conferences, and that you wouldn't need presenters and all this sort of stuff. You'd simply go from one press conference to another. Sounds like the worst television you can possibly imagine.
Does anyone?
But that was the view.
Does anyone follow this channel?
I'm streaming all my television now, and one thing that really does annoy me about this, and anyone at the ABC listening to this bloody will take notice, that their live news stream is not live.
Okay.
In fact, so if you want to listen, you want to watch the 7:30 report streamed into your home, you'll be able to catch that at about 10 to 8. I'm quite serious about this. I don't know how they get away with it. But there you go. And it really does annoy me. So to the point where I just don't watch 7:30 anymore. I might watch a replay every now and then.
My bugbear with what they call iView is that every damn thing's geo-blocked. So in Hong Kong, I can't watch it. And this is stuff that there is no market for overseas.
Yeah. One of the bugbears I've got.
7:30 report I quite like, but there aren't a lot of people in Hong Kong and Bangkok and Singapore who want to watch 7:30 report.
Look, if we're going to have a go at media organisations, Foxtel, fix your sporting app or fix your app they've got sports, they've got the dedicated AFL channels, they've got dedicated cricket channels, dedicated rugby league channels, and they've got these vast libraries that are just thrown in without any sense of order or chronological date or anything like that. Fix it, idiots! I tried to watch a game while I was away, and when I came home after being away in London, and just scroll through 100, well, maybe 200 AFL replays, including AFLW, not there. Just no library, no sense of filing or anything like that. Just awful. All right.
Well, the reason they've got to fix that is that there will be dodgy competition that will take their money away.
Jack, there's already dodgy competition.
Well, I know there
and
is.
It's called KO. And the encouragement is, if you want to watch replays and things like that, get the KO app. But I ain't paying for it. I used to, but I don't anymore because I got Foxtel, which covers these things live. But that's the enticement. The libraries are, in my view, I may be wrong, but the libraries are essentially all over the shop, no chronological order or any sort of logical order, because they want you to jump on KO. And KO keeps sending me text messages, please join, and I'm just saying no.
It's certainly possible in this part of the world to buy a small device that you put next to your television and you watch all UK, Australian and US television.
Well, you can, Jack, legally and legitimately. You could.
Well, I wouldn't make that accusation against this device.
AFL, you can just log on as an international viewer. And I think it costs about $30 or $40 a year, doesn't it?
It does. Like that. Yeah, not very much.
That's just AFL, of course. But we have a broader view of that. We're moving on to sport now. First test in Multan. The second test gets underway today between England and Pakistan. Test cricket. England 7 for 823. They only batted the once. You only need to bat once if you make 823.
Well, more importantly, Pakistan knocked up 500 in the first innings.
Yeah, 564, I think it was.
At that stage, you think, well, the worst we're going to have here is a draw.
The rule of thumb is if you make batting first, you make more than 400, you pretty much can't be beaten. But
not only did they not win the test, but they lost by an innings.
Yeah. Well, like I say, if you make 823, you only need to bat the once. So Harry Brook, who's a star, well, he's a star already, but I think once he gets the bad shot out of his game, he could be a huge accumulator of runs. Harry Brook got 317, Joe Root 262. They put on 590 for the fifth wicket partnership. I think fifth, it would be fifth. No one's bowling figures were complimentary, but we must point out to Abra Ahmed, second change, 35 overs, no maidens. 35 overs, no maidens, none for 174. He had a long day, a long couple of days. There was only one maiden bowled in the entire innings, England's entire innings of 823. And as you mentioned, Jack, Pakistan cleaned up in their second innings for 220 off just 54 overs, which is pretty awful. And with Jack Leach taking 4 for 30.
2 years ago, Root was at the bottom end of the big four behind Smith, Coley, Kane Williamson. He's now at the top, I think I'd be safe to say.
Well, he's got virtually everyone but Tendulkar covered in terms of career test runs.
Yeah, and Harry Brook is probably the best of the next generation of batsmen.
Yeah.
And I've got to say, I watched a good bit of the Pakistan second innings, and they weren't very good with the bat, but England were pretty good with the ball. Yeah.
Well, yes, I say Leach taking 4 for 30. I don't know that Leach.
I think the Wicks were okay as well. Wicks were okay as well.
Maybe. The wickets were all shared around, but Leach had the best bowling figures. I agree with that, Jack. I saw Root and Brook bat at Lords against Sri Lanka. Brook plays the ball so well under his eyes that he's clearly a class act, but he does have that bad shot in the locker that he needs to get rid of. And Root, well, he's always played the ball under his eyes, and he is in a rich vein of form at the moment. He looks like he will overtake everyone but Sachin Tendulkar. I think he's within about 200 or 300, about 600 runs of knocking over Ricky Ponting.
Yeah, the last frontier for him will be a one more tour of Australia and get 100 there.
I would think that might see him out. Meanwhile, Jack, in the Women's T20 World Cup, Australia into the semis after defeating India, and India will not qualify for the finals as a result. The victory came with some problems. Skipper Alyssa Healy had what's described as a serious right foot injury, and was seen in the moon boot on crutches at the game against India. And of course, Australia's very fast bowler, probably the fastest bowler in women's cricket, Tanya Vlaminck, dislocated her shoulder while fielding diving into the boundary Toblerone in the same game. And that's a shame. I mean, you'd always say to quicks, wouldn't you? Don't dive. Please don't dive. I know you used in the old days, Jack, you used to have the quicks just throwing the foot out.
Put the foot out, and fairly gently at that.
But really, there is some sense behind that.
The worst first session England, I think, we ever had in a test match. I think Nas Hussain was captain in Brisbane opening test of the series.
Put Australia in.
Put Australia in. The first ball went to second slip. And before the hour was out, his best bowler, Simon Jones, had tumbled over the rope and done his knee.
Yeah, done his ACL. That was a very sad moment. A hell of a bowler.
Mm.
Meanwhile, in terms of cricket injuries, Cameron Green is off for back surgery and will miss all of season 24-25. Causes quite a selection conundrum. And
this new bloke, is it from New South Wales?
We'll talk about him in a minute, Jack. We'll get to him, but basically the chairman of selectors, I'm just trying to think, the Tasmania, what's his name? Anyway, it doesn't matter. He said that all-rounders, and he included Mitch Marsh and Cameron Green in his discussion, have been able to hold their own, batting either 1 to 6, and we expect that from anyone that they'll be picking. So it sort of indicates they might go another batter. But we will see. In the meantime, the Australia A squad to face India A, I think early next month, has been announced. Nathan McSweeney is captain. Scott Boland, he's an unlucky cricketer, Scott Boland, just a brilliant bowler, a brilliant line and length guy. Cameron Bancroft, who got a first ball duck against Queensland last week, he's in the squad. Marcus Harris, who got 100 for Victoria last week, he's in the squad too. Cooper Connolly, who's in the one-day Australian squad, he's there. Corey Roccaccioli is in there too. There's Todd Murphy, a couple of spinners, Josh Felipe, and of course, as you sort of mentioned, took my thunder. Sam Constas has been announced as a member of the Australia A side. He is just 19 years of age, and he announced himself as a star of the future against South Australia last week, becoming the youngest man since Ricky Ponting in 1992 to record 2 centuries in a Sheffield Shield game. Ricky Ponting was just 18. But, Jack, he's the youngest. Sam Constas is the youngest New South Wales cricketer to make 100 in both innings of a Shield game since Archie Jackson in 1927-28. Did you see it in the highlights? I mean,
saw bits and pieces of it. It looks pretty good. Doug Walters made 100 for Australia at 19, I think, or 20, wasn't it?
Look, there's clearly an opening spot around. I don't think the Australian selectors want Smith to open, so that would push him back down to 4, Labuschagne at 3. And so what we need is either blaster, someone like a Mitch Marsh, a blaster to as a sort of foil for Usman Khawaja, who's a more conservative player, spends time at the crease. Or we do go with someone like Sam Constas. When you have a look at this guy, with Sam Constas' junior record, it's staggering. He played for New South Wales schoolboys, got 400s in the tournament and four on the trot. So he is a prodigy in the making. The key to selection, Jack, it's always you got to pick them in form. Don't pick them when they're on the tail end of form. You got to pick them when they're in form. So if he gets a few runs for Australia A, he has to come into consideration.
The technique looks all right.
Oh, mate, I just watched him play some cover drives, and he's special. He's a special boy. Finally, now to the AFL trade period, Jack. I do have some late reporting on that. I don't know that it's capturing the imagination all that much, is it? But
by Jose, there's a lot of television being devoted, or social media,
and print and online, and all sorts of stuff. So the latest is this can never be a spectator sport because it's just too complicated. So Carlton have now picked up pick 3 in this year's draft after giving Matt Owies, who kicked 30 goals for the Blues this year, picks 12 and 73 to West Coast, and pick 14 to Richmond, and they've gained pick 3 in this year's draft, 63 and 68 from the Eagles. The view about this year's draft is it is absolutely chock-a-block of talent. Really, from 1 to 20, they should be sort of almost ready-made AFL footballers. So the Eagles, they've picked up Matt Owies, and they've lost that pick 3, and now this allows Liam Baker to join the West Coast Eagles, and Richmond, who finished on the bottom this year. I got that right, didn't I? Yeah, they finished on the bottom.
I think they did, yeah.
They will have picks in, like I say, a highly talented draft that are reminiscent of the days of the GWS Giants, and when they first started and were getting all sorts of draft additions. I think they've got someone. I actually just read this, but they've got. The Tigers now hold picks 1, 14, 20, 24, 51, 61, 70, 76, and will likely land 6 and 23 when they send Daniel Rioli to Gold Coast. Anyway, that is stuff for the AFL obsessed. I don't think anyone else is paying too much attention.
Parker has Parker gotten to North Melbourne yet?
No, they seem to have hit a hurdle there. The Swans are not happy with what they've been offered for him. He'd be a tremendous addition at North Melbourne.
Yeah, well, I think that's right. I can't remember. I think it was Gary Lyon saying about when Jordan Lewis arrived at Melbourne, the ex-Hawthorn player, and when Luke Hodge arrived at Brisbane, they just made a difference. He says Lewis went to training a couple of times and sat down with the blokes and says, you think you work hard, you think you're really professional about this, but you're not. And because he was a 4-time premiership player, people had to listen.
Yeah. I listen to Jordan Lewis probably more than I should in his commentary, but look, that's quite true. I mean, you do bring that, and Parker is such a hard unit himself, so he put his body on the line, but also have that ability to say, or have the runs on the board, the kudos on the board to say, well, let's do this way. I mean, he wouldn't be jumping over Alistair Clarkson's or jumping on Alistair Clarkson's authority. Otherwise, he may not last all that long. But yeah, he'd be a great addition. But I think it's all stalled. The big one is the South Australian or the Port Adelaide defender, and that looks like he might go to Collingwood. We've got a couple of days left before it all wraps up. That's the one everyone wants. He's a former All-Australian. I'm just trying to think of his name. Yes, thank you. And Jake Stringer may well be off to the Giants. Essendon are fairly keen to be rid of him. I'm going to say, for Carlton's point of view, Matt Owies was clearly their best small forward, kicked 30 goals. It's been pretty hard on him, but off he goes to West Coast.
Did they not want him, or did he want to go?
They told him. They told him, look around. They said the same thing to Matt Kennedy. Look around. You've still got a year to go on your contract. But it's clear from listening to Nick Austin, who's the Carlton list manager, that they are very keen on this year's draft. They're not so keen on that. They reckon the level of talent in this year's draft is quite unique in terms of its depth, not just one standout player, one standout young player, and they want to get into the absolute higher echelons of it, so that they will have pick number 3. Not bad when you finish 7th or 8th. All righty, well, that takes us out, unless you've got something weird and wonderful to share with us, Jack.
Yeah, back to the UK. The hapless government has got a workers' rights and industrial relations bill up at the moment, and it makes employers liable for staff being offended by third-party statements and practices. And people are saying, well, how could you run a pub and be responsible for anyone in the pub saying something to your staff that might offend them? It would just about make it impossible.
Well, look, the same thing would go for anyone in the catering, hospitality business, and one suspects even in sort of corporate manufacturing, all sorts of things. But yeah, that just looks like a lousy piece of legislation, Jack, a lousy piece of drafting.
Yeah, I mean, one of the reasons why I'm quite fond of going to my local is that the banter is fairly vigorous. One wouldn't want to be too easily offended to remain in the corner that we inhabit.
Well, everyone's entitled to be offended, but they're not entitled to silence the other person. But that's just the way it works. All right, well, that takes us out of episode 91 of the Two Jacks. We are going to go through our readers' letters. We've got a few banked up. We'll get to those next week and we'll address them, put them to Jack and put them to myself. But we do encourage our listeners to hit us up with correspondence. Get it in before next week and you'll be on the show. And so you can hit me up on Twitter or X. My DMs are always open. And Jack, you can hit him up on Substack, on his Substack.
HongKongJack.substack.com.
There you go. We'll look forward to catching up with you next week for episode 92 of the Two Jacks. And until then, have a great week. See you later.